Havana, 1991. An adult man wakes up and his belt doesn't fit anymore. Not because he found discipline, but because his government lost a subsidy check from Moscow and forgot to tell him. No sirens, no emergency broadcast. Just a quieter shelf at the bodega than the week before, and then quieter than that, until quiet became the whole vocabulary. The ration book, the Libreta, had been the backbone of Cuban food distribution since the 60s, guaranteeing a baseline of rice, beans, oil, and sugar. And in the opening months of what the government cheerfully branded the special period in peacetime, that baseline simply stopped covering the math of staying alive. Adults lost, on average, somewhere between 5 and 20 pounds of body weight in the first year alone. Not from a diet plan, from arithmetic. The Soviet Union that had been quietly propping up the island's entire caloric economy through oil and trade subsidies dissolved, and Cuba discovered in real time what every stable-looking system eventually discovers. Subsidies aren't a floor, they're a loan, and loans get called. Now here's where the popular version of this story likes to wrap things up in a nice little bow. The myth goes like this. Cuba got hungry. Cuba built rooftop gardens and urban organoponicos. Cuba fed itself through clever agriculture, roll credits. Isn't sustainable farming inspiring? And sure, eventually, those urban farms became a real and celebrated part of Cuban food security. Eventually, the Organoponico movement didn't hit meaningful national scale until the mid to late 90s, which means for the brutal opening stretch, the worst 18 to 24 months, when the average Cuban was hemorrhaging body weight and the Libreta was a cruel joke printed on paper, urban farming was not what kept the lights on in people's stomachs. What kept people alive was a completely undocumented, informal, sprawling economy of favors. Cubans have a word for it, Sociolismo, a pun on Socialismo, socialism, except this was survival running on relationships instead of ideology. The guy who could fix a refrigerator compressor traded that skill for eggs. The woman who knew how to render soap from used cooking fat traded bars of it for actual cooking oil. Someone's cousin had access to a state truck route near a farm outside the city, and that access became currency more valuable than pesos because pesos couldn't buy what wasn't on any shelf. This wasn't charity, it was infrastructure. It just didn't look like infrastructure, because nobody built it with permits. Let's run the numbers, because I like numbers. They don't lie to you the way governments do. Pre-crisis, the average Cuban diet sat around 2,900 to 3,000 calories a day, which is a comfortable, functional intake for an active adult. By 1993, at the low point, estimates put much of the population somewhere between 1,400 and 1,900 calories a day. Sit with that range for a second, because it's a wide range, and every number inside it is bad news wearing a different coat. 1,400 calories a day is not a diet. It is the beginning of your body eating its own muscle tissue to keep your organs running. At that intake, sustained manual labor becomes genuinely dangerous. Cognitive function drops measurably, decision-making slows, and here's the part nobody puts on a motivational poster. Chronic caloric deficit doesn't just make you weak, it makes you stupid at exactly the moment you need to be clever. Cuba actually recorded a documented spike in a nutritional optic neuropathy, a vision disorder tied directly to malnutrition and vitamin deficiency, affecting tens of thousands of people. That's not a hypothetical wasteland injury I'm dramatizing for you. That's a peer-reviewed medical outcome from a real, slow, bureaucratic collapse. Now think about this in terms of a stockpile. Say a household had done everything the modern prepper video tells you to do. Rice, beans, oil sealed and stored, calculated out to some comfortable daily ration. Fine. That stockpile has a shelf life measured in months, maybe a couple years if you're disciplined and lucky with pests and humidity. And Havana in the 90s was not short on either. A finite stockpile is a countdown timer. It only ever gets smaller. What Sociolismo created instead was something closer to a renewable stream. A barter network doesn't run out the way a pantry does, because its fuel isn't calories, it's relationships and reciprocity, and those can regenerate as long as people keep showing up for each other. One is a melting ice cube. The other is a well that refills, slowly, unevenly, but it refills. Here's the mistake, and I want you to actually feel a little targeted by this, because if you're the type of person watching survival content, there's a decent chance this is you. The lone wolf instinct, the bunker mentality, the idea that self-sufficiency means needing nobody, that the ultimate flex is a basement full of buckets and zero dependence on another human being. It's a seductive fantasy because it feels like control. Cuba's special period is a documented real-world experiment disproving it at scale. Isolated households, the ones that hoarded rice and beans and kept to themselves, didn't fail because they ran out of rice and beans. They failed because they hit one specific point of scarcity that stockpiling has no answer for. Protein, for instance. You cannot store your way out of a protein deficiency forever, and Cuba's meat supply collapsed dramatically. Black beans and rice will only carry you so far nutritionally. Cooking fuel. Doesn't matter how much food you have if you have no propane and no functioning stove and no idea how to improvise one. Medicine. A stockpile of grain does exactly nothing for a kid with a treatable infection and no access to antibiotics. The isolated household hits one of these walls and simply stops because a pile of static goods can't dynamically reallocate itself into whatever category is currently killing you. A network can. That's the entire difference. And it's not philosophical, it's mechanical. The households that actually made it through, documented in interviews and academic case studies from that period, a pattern that repeats with almost boring consistency. Wide networks, low trust cost relationships, meaning you didn't need a notarized contract to trade with your neighbor. You needed a reputation and a habit of showing up. A mechanic who fixed bicycles, which had become the primary mode of transportation once gasoline essentially vanished, and got paid in eggs. A woman making soap out of necessity who traded it for cooking oil. A retired school teacher who tutored a neighbor's kid in exchange for a cut of whatever that family managed to grow on their balcony. None of these people were farming at scale. None of them were doing anything a magazine would call impressive. They were running a distributed, informal economy of specialized skills, and it outperformed hoarding because it could solve for whatever was scarce that particular week, instead of solving for one static assumption about what scarcity would look like. So here's the actual actionable piece, and I'm going to be specific because vague build community advice is what people say when they don't want to do the work of thinking it through. Build a redundant local network of 5 to 8 people before you need one, and choose them for non-overlapping value, not for how much you like them. You want a mechanical skill, a medical skill, even at a basic first aid level, someone with physical space or storage capacity, someone with a vehicle or fuel access, someone with food production knowledge, and at least one person who has a wider social reach than you do, because networks that only connect to themselves die the same way isolated households die, Then do the audit nobody wants to do. Sit down and write out, honestly, what you could offer in week 1 of a real collapse that has nothing to do with what's in your pantry. Not, I have supplies, because supplies are finite, and everyone with supplies is one bad season away from needing something they didn't store. What's your tradable skill? What's your tradable service? If your honest answer is nothing, I just have a lot of canned goods, you have identified your actual vulnerability, and it isn't the size of your pantry. Because here's the tired, uncomfortable truth I've made peace with, and I say this without much sympathy left in the tank. Most people who spend money and time on this hobby have optimized entirely for isolation. Bigger bunker, deeper pantry, more ammunition, less trust in anyone outside the immediate family unit. It feels responsible. It photographs well. And in a genuine slow collapse scenario, the kind Cuba lived through for years, not weeks, the kind that doesn't announce itself with an explosion, but arrives as a series of quietly empty shelves, that person eventually hits their one point of scarcity their stockpile can't cover. Protein, fuel, medicine, doesn't matter which. And they find out, at the worst possible moment, that they built a fortress full of goods and no bridges to anyone who might actually have what they now desperately need. Meanwhile, the person next door with nothing stored but a working set of hands and a reputation for showing up when asked, eats fine. Not because life is fair, it isn't. Because reciprocity is the only renewable resource in a collapse, and nobody puts that on a supply checklist. I already ran this math a long time ago. I'm not upset about it anymore. Just a little tired of watching everyone else find out the hard way.
Welcome to the wasteland, darling, where the jukebox never dies. Just a little music for the journey underneath these endless skies.